Everyone, how you doing? Dan here, and today we're at Reddish Vale next to the waterfall, and today I thought I'd go over 5 more quick tips to get better photos with your Mini 2 and just with your photography in general. If you haven't seen my previous video on getting better photography with the Mini 2, make sure to check that out. I'll put the link just up above. But let's get started with the first tip. So before I even take the drone off, the best tip I can give you is to shoot in the best light possible. So in the morning and the evening we've got golden hour, and that is the best time to shoot. It's when the sun is super low, you get super long shadows, it's a super soft light, and also it gives a nice golden glow to everything, and it just looks absolutely amazing. If you take a picture at say 12 o'clock in the afternoon and then come back later on at golden hour, I promise you it will look better. Also, just coming earlier to things in general, you tend to see a lot of mist and the sun comes through it and you get these really cool rays as well. Just try and pay attention to when you're taking your pictures. Like, I'm not saying you can't get good looking pictures, you know, after golden hour or before golden hour. If you're looking for an image that really stands out and really pops, shooting in golden hour will definitely help you out. Now, before I even take off, I will show you tip number 2. I promise I will take off at some point. So tip number 2 is to use your histogram and your zebras. You can turn your histogram on, which is this grid here, and your zebras, which you can see on the sun there, just by pressing, just by pressing this little menu up here, going over to camera, and then you can turn on histogram and overexposure warning. If you turn that off, you can see the sun, and that's a histogram. So it's what the histogram does is anything to the left is underexposed and anything to the right of the graph is overexposed. So you can see here I'm massively underexposed. Now that's because I've got an ND64 on the drone, which we'll come to in a second. This is the first time today I've ever even put it on. But it's what we can do is we can start messing around with these settings to bring that exposure up. So there we go, as you can see now that histogram's changed, and that's looking quite nicely exposed. So we've got data at the left and the right. We've got a spike at the left because the water's quite dark, and we've got a spike at the right because the sky's quite bright. So in scenes like this, I'd definitely be recommending to shoot in automatic exposure bracketing mode or HDR mode. Again, check out my last video where I go over that in quite a lot of detail, and I also show you how to edit them images together in Adobe Lightroom. But the idea is to get like a nice balanced exposure. I do tend to expose more to the right because I know I can bring the shadows up a little bit more, but that's just something for you guys to have a play around with and a mess with, just making sure I'm still recording. And you get your zebras. So your zebras just tell you anything what's overexposed. So obviously I'm pointing the camera at the sun here and it's overexposed, which is to be expected. Now it's quite difficult, like I'm saying, we're working with scenes like this where it's really dark with the water and the sky is really bright, so you would be looking at either fixing it with an automatic exposure bracket, a HDR image, or just fixing it in post and hoping that you've got enough data to play with, which obviously shooting raw will definitely help out with. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is to use the Pro settings down here now. So that's a new update. You never used to have all your settings here this handily available. Now if you're in auto mode, you can tell that with a little camera down here. You won't actually see the settings, but if you just tap auto, it'll put it into Pro mode, and then you can change all of these settings. So you can change the RAW and JPEG mode, the shutter speed, the ISO, and the white balance. Now white balance isn't that important when you're shooting RAW because you can change it in post, but it's always nice to get in the habit of setting it manually, especially if you shoot video as well, because if you forget to change it for video, you're going to struggle fixing that in post. So I'm just going to change mine, so we're looking at about 53, which is looking quite nice. Now the reason I've got the ND64 on is because I want to talk about shutter speed for a sec. So in my last video I mentioned quite in detail about shooting at a high shutter speed with a drone, and that's not something that you always have to do really. It's not, you can also use it as a very creative choice. So whilst we're at the waterfall here today, we're going to send the drone up and we'll get a nice long exposure of the waterfall. So I'll do that now. I am going to send it off from my hands because the ground is really not very flat here.
Take off. The home point has been updated. Please check it on the map.
So the reason I've got an ND64 on is because I want to capture time. So that means I need to have my shutter hub open for a bit longer. Now, it's super bright today, so even the ND64 is struggling, which, as I was saying earlier on, I've never even used an ND64 before, never mind struggled with using one, so Just shows how bright it actually is today. But this is just to show you what kind of things, look how nice that's looking. Now earlier on with the intro footage I got, this was so misty, it was just looking absolutely stunning. So this is also going to bring me into another point as well. Let's just try and get a nice composition. Now I want to get quite low for this because I want to see the water move. I thought that was a swan, but nope. So maybe something about there. Now as you can see here, I am overexposed. I've got zebras and I'm quite far to the right on with that spike. So let's just knock the ISO all the way down. Now that's obviously going to make it really dark, so we need to compensate with the shutter speed, but that's fine because now we can knock it to, let's try and go as slow as possible. I'm going to use it about 1/12, no, actually let's go one more, 1/10 per second. Now ideally for capturing motion I'd want to be a lot slower, but it's just so bright that I can't limit the light anymore. I don't actually have a 128 ND filter. I'll just take this picture, yeah. Obviously I'm overexposed here, but I'm just trying to show you that capturing emotion. Like I was saying, this is one of the problems with the drones, is because they've got a fixed aperture. So it's fixed at 2.8, so it's not all drones, but it's for cheaper drones. So you can't actually close, like you can't actually limit the amount of light going into the camera, which is a bit of a shame really, because it's like for situations like this where you do want to do that, it can be quite difficult. So that's why ND filters are really useful when you're shooting with the drone. ND filters are essential when you're shooting video, so the shutter speed should be double your frame rate, as I mentioned in the previous video. But even for photography, like you don't need them for photography because you can get like nice sharp images. Just experimenting with ND and time and long exposures, that'll definitely set you out from the crowd too. So definitely something I'd recommend looking into as well. So next on the list, we're going to look at capturing a wider image. Now this is really useful because you can crop in post later on, and you can also make 360 little planets. So if you click on the picture, if you click on the mode at the top and go down to Pano, you've got Sphere. So Sphere will take a 360 image, and I think that ends up at like a 178 megapixel image. And with that, you can probably get about 9 or 10 separate images, all for your Instagram from one image, just by cropping it differently. And you can also do a nice panoramic swipe on Instagram, so people can swipe through the 360 image, and that's always great for engagement. And it's something quite different as well, which also kind of makes you stand out from the crowd. So spheres are quite useful. I'm not going to take it now because it takes quite a while to actually process. And also wide angle's quite good as well. So what this does is, like I said, it just takes, I think, 9 images at different angles and stitches them together. So you've got a super wide image, which then you can kind of choose your crop later on in post. So that's super useful as well. All this is about having as much data to play with in post as possible. So shooting raw definitely helps with that. Shooting wider definitely helps with that. And, you know, just getting as many settings right on location as possible also helps with that as well. So that's tip number 4. And tip number 5 is, I'm going to use some of the video example that I shot at the start for this, but tip number 5 is try and experiment with different heights and compositions. One thing you tend to see when people get a drone is they send it really, really high up and they get a top-down shot, which looks great, it's quite unique, but a drone can get anywhere. Like, so just for example, for this waterfall here, you'll have people taking pictures from the bank over there, you'll have people taking pictures from the bridge over there, you'll have people taking pictures from the actual waterfall up there, but you see them all the time, there's nothing new there. With a drone, you can get it really low down, just above the water, looking up at the waterfall, or you can have it, you know, just off to the side. Just because you've got the drone doesn't mean you just have to go to the highest point possible. So just try and think about different compositions at different heights. And again, that'll just really set your image apart as well. So this is, you know, just always be thinking, what's different, what has no one else done before? Like, I know other people have done this shot before, but it's a much more unique shot than all the other ones you see. So definitely something to bear in mind there. But yeah, I'm just going to bring my drone back. Whoa, it's a bit low. Here it comes. Oh. So as a quick recap, we've had a look at setting your histogram and zebras, just so you can kind of control your exposure a little bit more. We've had a look at actually creatively setting your shutter speed as well. So as I was saying, like 90% of images you see taken with a drone are just normal images with a normal shutter speed, and it's very rare you see one with a longer shutter speed, a longer exposure. So that's just something worth checking out, but you will need an ND filter, especially when shooting on days as bright as this. I mean, I'm super surprised that the ND64 did nothing. That just shows how bright it is today. We've had a look at kind of looking at different compositions as well and setting different heights with your drone. The top-down view always looks great, but try and find different angles, try and find a bit of foreground, just something that makes it really stand out. We had a look at shooting a little bit wider so you can crop in post and also make panoramas for your Instagram, which people do like to see. That's always quite handy. We had a look at shooting in the best possible light, so ideally golden hour or blue hour, and you'll get a really, really nice soft light, a nice orange glow, super long shadows, and if you come out early in the morning, you'll get a bit of mist, which really, really sells your video and images. And along with the exposure, we also had a look with the new Pro mode, with the new update with the DJI MINI 2. I hope you learned something new in this video. If you've not seen my previous video, that's a great place to start. There's 5 more tips there, and that's like a great start to this video, and then this one kind of continues from that quite nicely. So if you've not seen that, make sure to check that out. But if you did learn something new or find the video enjoyable, please leave a comment, leave a like, and even subscribe to the channel. That'd be amazing, thank you. But I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers, I'll see you later.